This video was an absolute doozy to make, oh my gosh. So in a previous video, we explored converting all of Unity's animator functionality into code. This proof of concept explored getting all the animation states and putting them in the animator without linking any of them. Then in the script, we played specific animations using animator.crossfade whenever the player would move in a specific way. The backbone of this workflow was to simply store the current animation that is playing in the script. If an animation is requested to play, it will check the requested animation against the animation that is currently playing. If they are different, it will play the requested animation. This worked really well. It means you can bypass using animator transitions and animator variables and trigger every single animation through code. You all gave a lot of great feedback on the video of how to make the system even better and really appreciate your comments. I listened and spent the past week designing a brand new system to handle animations entirely through script. What I'm about to share with you completely changes the way we do animations in Unity to make them more intuitive, straightforward, and quicker to design. By the end of this video, we'll have written or copied and pasted the one script that will allow you to play all animations through your script, and then you won't need to use the animator ever again. This script is my gift to you. I just want to help your game development journey. So without further ado, let's get into what this magical script is. The script I am talking about is the AnimatorBrain. So let's go over its importance. For any project, you have a unit which has animations. This could be an enemy, player, or an NPC. These units all link to the AnimatorBrain script. The AnimatorBrain makes all the decisions whether an animation should be played or not. So let's go through what this means. Let's say the player is in the running forward animation. The player presses the reload key, and so the reload animation is requested to the AnimatorBrain. The AnimatorBrain approves this request, and so the reload animation is played. Now let's say midway through the reload animation, the shoot key is pressed, and so the shooting animation is requested to the AnimatorBrain. The AnimatorBrain observes that the reload animation is currently playing and knows it cannot be overridden because the reload animation needs to play all the way through. So the AnimatorBrain denies this request and continues playing the reload animation. Then when the reload animation is finished, the AnimatorBrain will now allow new animations to play. We can give animations a couple of important attributes to dictate the difference between a shoot and a reload animation. The first is whether the animation can be overridable. Examples of an overridable animation are idle, walk, and shooting animations. Let's say the player is standing still and is playing the idle animation. If the player starts moving, the run animation should override the idle animation and play that instead. On the contrary, there are also locked animations, which are the opposite of overridable animations. Examples of locked animations are reloading, jump, hit, and death animations. Once these animations start playing, it should play all the way through and another animation should not be able to override it. The next important attribute is whether an animation can override an already locked animation. Let's say the player is reloading and is midway through, and the player gets hit. Since the reloading animation is a locked animation, it should block all incoming animations from playing. But if the player gets hit, the hit animation should play regardless if the animation is locked or not. The animation should override any locks currently in the animator. I'll call these animations critical animations. So we have two key attributes an animation should have. Should it be locked and play all the way through, or should it be able to override that lock? So when a unit requests to play an animation, what animation should it send to the brain? First, it should send the animation that is being requested, the layer the animation is on, whether it should lock the animation, whether it should bypass the lock, and the transition time of the animation. In Unity terms, this is called the crossfade. By the end of the video, you will have a script that holds all the logic in the AnimatorBrain. Now we know exactly what we're making, let's hop into Unity and see what this looks like. Alright, so I'm in the Unity editor, and if I were to click play, this is what I've got set up right now. I've got my chicken, and he can run around. He's got the run animation. He can run left, run right, run back and forward. He can also jump in the air. He can also shoot, and he can also reload. And if he runs over here, if I press a button, I can also make him fall over and die. Now the key error is that every single animation in here is done by a script. Nothing in here is done in the animator. And of course I've separated it, so you've got the top animation and the bottom animation, right? It could jump and it can shoot at the same time. You can also jump and reload at the same time. You know, everything is separated. If I were to look at the animator, here's proof. I've got the player and I've got upper body, lower body, and look at all that. There's no transition lines. And if I were to go to parameters, oh, there's one here, but I can delete that one. There we go, now this is empty and we've got nothing here. Now I'm actually using one of my new assets called Light Flicker Ultimate, and I'm using it on this lamp over here. And at the moment it's 50% off because it's a new release, and it will end around next Tuesday. So for the setup, I've got the player over here. Now when it comes to the animator, I've got two layers. I've got the upper body and the lower body. To separate them out, I used avatar masks. So you can add one by going right click, create, and avatar mask down here. You can see there's two options. You got humanoid, which is the most common one, and this is where you choose which parts of the body you want to keep. And then over in the layers here, I've got this upper body as the default layer, and I've got no avatar mask or anything here. And in the lower body, this is where I've added the lower body avatar mask, and I've set it to override. And also the weight is to 1, so that the lower body is completely overridden by these animations. You can see I've got all the things as before, except the player does not have any animations. They can jump, they can reload, but they just don't do any animations at the moment. So I'm going to split this video into 2 chapters. In the first chapter, we're going to create the animator brain, and then once that's done, we'll create a unit which will utilize this animator brain. And this unit will be, of course, Alfred the chicken here. And in the player movement script, you can see there is nothing here to do with animations. But first, let's add the animator brain. So I'm going to go into my scripts, I'm going to right click and create a new script, and I'm going to open that up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've created this class here, is I'm going to make the player movement inherited. So I'm going to make it inherit the animator brain. So this works because the player movement inherits the animator brain, and the animator brain inherits mono behavior. So there's this really smooth train of inheritance that eventually leads to a mono behavior. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this and first create a enum, and this enum contains every single animation that we'll ever need. So I'm going to do this because if we want to send through an animation to play, instead of sending through a string, I'm going to send through an enum. So it has to be one of these animations that's going to send through. And at the very end, I'm going to make a none animation over here. This is so that, you can send through a null animation and it'll just reset the entire thing. So now our next step is we need to link these animations to an actual animation. So I'm going to create an array that contains all the animations that I can link it to. Alright, so you'll notice that I've matched each of these to the animations, and I'm storing them as an int, as a hash, because you can actually go animator.play and play it as a hash, and that is going to be far quicker than trying to use it as a string. So now I've got these stored. One other thing to note is that these have to match the animator perfectly. So if I were to go back, and yeah, it has to load up, but you can see here's idle1, idle2, idle3. And I've matched these words up like perfectly. So the next thing, what have I got on my notes, is we need to put the variables in. The first one is we need a reference to the animator that we want to play it through. So this animator will be attached to, in this case, the player movement script. Because you can see here, if I go to my player, I've got my animator here. The next one is we need to know what the current animation is. So I'm going to make a animations array, and I'll tell you why in a sec. And I'm going to name this current animation. I'll put it as an array, and the length of this array is the amount of layers that you have in the animator. In the upper body, one of these has to be the current animation, right? So let's say run left is the current animation for upper body in this top layer. And then in the lower body, your current animation is, I don't know, the idle animation, right? So there could be 2 different kinds of current animations in each layer. And I'll do the exact same thing, but for if the layer itself is locked. So I'm going to make a bool array. So here we can see if any of the layers are locked. And we talked about locked at the very start. If a layer is locked, then nothing else can be played, right? So let's say upper body is locked right now, and you are playing the reload animation. Well, if you were to cue the run left animation, well, it won't play because the upper body layer is locked, right? So yeah, so this will keep track about which layers are locked and which ones will allow new animations to override them. Now these three are pretty straightforward, but the last one might dig your head in a little bit, and I'll explain what its use is. Okay, so I've added an action here, and it takes in an int. So what is this, right? You might have never seen this before. So it basically just stores a method, and I'm calling this default animation. So here's what it is. In every single script that inherits AnimatorBrain needs to have a default animation method, and this is what it looks like. So what this method does is it takes in a layer and it will play the default animation for that layer. So what does this mean? It means that if we were to reset everything to the start, this is what this method does. So let's say the default is a idle animation, right? Well, then we can say, okay, well, the default animation is idle, but what if they're moving? So let's do another check in here. Then we can add another check in here. We can say, if the player is not moving, then we run an idle animation. But if the player is moving, then we do a run animation, right? So this is like the default chain, right? If everything else fails, then we just run this and then we can get it to the right animation again. So over here, I'm going to hold what that method actually is, and it's going to hold this method. And in the AnimatorBrain, if it needs to, it can run this method from anywhere. Now we've got that done, we need to make the initialize method. Alright, so this initialize method is going to be called in the start method of whatever script inherits it. So in this case, in the play movement script, I'm going to go to start and I'm going to go initialize and I'll put all the variables I need in here. Right, so that's what we do at the start. Now for these variables, why have I put these variables in? Well, first of all, we need to pass in how many layers the animator has. And of course, there's 2 layers in this case. The second one is we want to know the starting animation. So, you know, what animation do you want to start with? And really, we're mimicking what this is. We're mimicking the default state. So that's what we're doing here. And for the third one, we are passing through the animator so that we can set it to this animator. And we're also passing through the default animation method so that we can set it to this here. So I'm going to start to fill this in. All right, there we go. Let me just walk through this real quick. So first of all, I'm going to get the layer locked array, and I'm going to make the length of this the amount of layers. Now, if you don't use C#, this here is going to ring a lot of alerts, but since we are using C#, we can put a variable in here. And yeah, that's great. Love C#. So down here, we've got current animation, and I'm going to get the length of the current animation array and set it to the amount of layers. And I'm going to set the animator to the animator and the default animation to the default animation. And then I'm going to loop through each layer, and I'm going to make each layer not locked. So I'm going to unlock each layer and going to set the current animation to the starting animation for each layer. Now there's a couple methods I'm going to add here. Now this one's pretty simple. You know, I'm taking in a layer and then it will return the current animation for that layer. Now I'm going to add a method to set a specific layer to be locked or unlocked. Right, so this one just takes in, do you want to lock the layer or not? And it takes in the layer. So you're just setting a specific layer to be locked or unlocked. Now we get to the fun part. Let's make the brain of the animator. So I'm going to add a method called play. Now when play is called from the play movement script, it's going to do a bunch of checks to see if it can play that specific animation or not. Now if you remember back earlier in the video, we actually said the parameters that it needs to pass through. Right, so these are the things I'm passing through. When you play an animation or you request to play an animation, you pass through the animation that you want to play. You pass through the layer that you want to play the animation at. You pass through whether you want to lock the layer or not. You know, like this animation is important, and so we want to play it all the way through, so we're not going to allow any other animations to play. We will pass through whether it should bypass that lock, you know, whether it's a really critical animation and it needs to play it, and we're going to pass through the crossfade as well. Now the very first check is we're going to check if the animation is none. So here we're checking if the animation you pass through is actually a none animation or like a null animation. Then we want to run this default animation method. We want to reset everything back to normal. And of course, this will be set in the play movement script over here, and we'll work on that later on in the video. Then our next check is if the layer is locked, we don't actually want to do any other animations. So I'm going to put that in. So this is checking if the layer is currently locked, then we will return it. We don't want to play any animations. However, if you can bypass the lock, then we will keep going. We will play the animation regardless. So at this rate, we know that the animation is now going to play if it gets through all of these checks. So now I'm going to update if the entire layer should be locked or should be unlocked. So there we go. So let's say a reload animation comes in. Of course, the layer would want to be locked if the reload animation comes in. So it goes through, it's not a none animation, and the layer is currently not locked. Then it gets to this stage and then it will lock the layer. I'm going to add one more check in here, and that is to check if the current animation that is playing is equal to the animation here. So here we're just checking the current animation that is playing. Is it equal to the animation that is being requested? If it is, we're going to return it because it's already playing. Now we get to the bottom of our checks. Now we're going to update the current animation. So now we are actually now going to crossfade the animation. Alright, so this is quite a long line, so I'll walk through what it is. So crossfade, what does it need? It needs the state hash name, and here we're just getting into our animations array, which is this one up here, and we're converting the enum here to an integer on that layer. Now actually, this is completely done. That's all the logic you need. The only thing to add now is the exit cases. Now I'll do that later. So let's head back to our player movement script and let's get animating. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to initialize. So let's go to our start method and let's add that in. Alright, so the things I passed through here, what does the initialize method need? It needs the amount of layers. So I'm going to get the animator component and I'm going to get the layer count. Now for the second one, the starting animation, I'm just going to set that to the idle animation. And then we need to get the actual animator. So I'm going to get the animator component there. And then I need to send through the default animation method. And we actually made one previously down here. Now the next thing is I'm going to keep track about which layer is which layer. So I'm going to add some constants. Alright, so I've just set the upper body to 0 and the lower body to 1 because the upper body is the 0th layer and the lower body is the first layer. Alright, now I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to start making the default animation methods, like which animations should be played by default. So I'm going to split this into two methods. So I've divided it into checking the top animation and checking the bottom animation. So this method is just going to check the movement animations, whether it should be running forward, it should be idle, whether it should be in the air, you know, those kinds of animations. So I'm going to run through them here. Alright, so I've added a bunch of checks here. First, I'm checking if the movement.y is more than 0. So what this means up here, if I scroll up, is our movement is set as a vector2 to be the horizontal input and the vertical input. So here we are checking the y, which is the vertical input, and we are checking if it's greater than 0. So that basically means if we are pressing the W key or we're pressing the up arrow key. So if we're doing either of these, we are moving forward. And what animation am I going to send through? I'm going to send through the run forward animation. And what's our next thing? Is the layer that it's on? Well, I'm sending through the layer here. So I'm going to put the layer in here. And now the next thing is whether we should lock the layer. Well, run forward isn't very important, so I'm not going to lock the layer. And should we bypass the lock? No, it's not very important, so I'm going to set that to false as well. So now I've put all that in, and I'm going to update the rest of these. Alright, now that that's done, I've just added in if the movement.y is less than 0, you're pressing the S key, and then if we are not grounded, then we're going to play the jump air animation. And if all else fails, if we are grounded and we're not doing anything, then let's play the idle animation. Now over here in the check top animation and the check bottom animation, I'm going to play this method. Cool, and there we go. So our top animation is being checked and our bottom animation is being checked. So now let's run on down to our default animation and we are going to run these methods. So now over here, when we pass through the layer, if the layer is the upper body, then we're going to check the top animation. But if it's not, then we're going to check the bottom animation. Now I'm going to be running this every single frame to check if we need to actually change the animations or not. So I'm going to scroll up and at the very end here, I'm going to check the top animation and I'm also going to check the bottom animation. So with that done, I'm going to head on back to Unity. So you can see that it's running the idle animation. When I start running, it does the run forward animation. I can run to the side, I can run backwards, and it does all the right animations. There's only one idle animation at the moment, so I'm going to add a few more. And you can see here on the upper body, I've got 3 idle animations. In the lower body, I've got the same 3 idle animations. So I want it to cycle between these. To do that, I'm going to keep reference of what the current idle animation actually is. And then in the start method, I'm going to make a coroutine that switches between them every like 2 seconds. So here, what this coroutine does is it repeats forever while true, and it waits 2 seconds, it adds 1 to current idle, and then if the current idle exceeds the amount of idle animations, then it sets it to 0. So let's figure out what this is. So here I'm just making a animations array and I'm setting this to every single idle animation that we have. So if I scroll down, all I need to do is replace this with the length of that array. So there we go. Now we've got every single idle animation that we need and we are changing the idle animations every 2 seconds. So now I'm going to scroll down here to our check movement animations method. So instead of just playing idle 1 every single time, I'm going to play the animation that it's currently on. Alright, so what does this do is it gets the idle animations that we specified up here and it gets the current idle and it finds the elements that's in the array right now and it plays that idle animation. So let's head back and press play. And you can see that the idle animations slowly transition from one to another. And if I start running, and then if I stop, it'll go to that idle animation that is playing next. Alright, so let's switch tactics and let's do the death animation. What if the player dies? Well, I've got a little bit of scripting here, and that is in the update function and under the check death method. So what this basically checks is if I press a left shift, then I'm going to kill the player, right? But it just disables the player movement script at the moment. But let's make it actually play the death animation. So what is this doing? Well, I am playing the death animation, and what layer am I playing it on? I'm playing it on the upper body. And what is the next one? The next one is lock layer. I do want to lock the layer so nothing else can get into it when I die. And also I want to bypass any locks, and I'm doing it to both of these. So basically when you die, it locks the layer and it locks it forever. So here we go, I'm running around and then I press left shift and he collapses. There he goes. And you'll notice that I'm trying to move and nothing happens because I disabled the player movement script when I press the left shift button. Yeah, you can see that the death animation has played and it's played all the way through and it's locked all the other animations from playing. Alright, now that one's off the list. We are going to do the reload animation. So how are we going to do that? So under my update function, I'm going to go to our check shooting method. And under our check shooting method, here if I press the R button, then it will simply play the reload sound. So I am going to change it. Alright, so now when the R key is pressed, it will play the reload animation and it will only do it to the upper body layer. And what's the next one? whether it should lock the layer. So I've set this to true because we want the reload animation to play all the way through and nothing should be able to override the reload animation. And also I've made it so it can't bypass any locks. It's not that important. But there's one problem with doing this, and you'll notice it. If I go back, and I'll keep my upper body open here. Alright, and if I press R and do the reload animation, then it will continue doing the reload animation and it won't stop, right? So we need some way of detecting when the entire animation has finished. So we're going to add a new script. And this script is going to be called OnExit. So I'm going to open this up. So what we want to do is when the whole entire animation finishes, or when the state is finished, it will transition to another state. And you might be wondering, why not use onStateExit? Well, if the state is just going to keep on looping, it's never going to exit. So that's why I'm going to use enter. Now let's add a few variables in. Now when the animation finishes, we're going to put in what animation we want to transition to next. And we're going to put in, do we want to lock the next animation? And now let's add the crossfade for the next one. So there we go. Now we've got our three variables. When the animation finishes, what we're going to transition to, whether we should lock the layer for the next animation, and whether we should crossfade it, and by how much. So I'm going to add a coroutine here. And this coroutine is basically going to trigger once the state is over. So let's walk this through. When it enters the state, it will play the coroutine, and then it will wait the length of the state minus the crossfade, so that when the crossfade is done crossfading, it will be exactly finished. And if I were to go back to our player movement script and scroll up, you can actually see that I've made a public static variable here and named it instance. And then in the awake, I've set instance equals to this. So here, you just need to put any static mono behavior in here, and then you can start the coroutine. So once it has waited that number of seconds, what are we going to do? Well, let's first get the AnimatorBrain component that is on the animator. Alright, what are we going to do to it? Well, we've finished it, so we're going to open it back up. We're going to unlock the layer. So there we go. I've set the layer to be unlocked to false. So now we can play any animation again. So now I'm going to play the animation. Alright, there we go. So after that's finished, we will unlock the layer and then play the next one. So if we head back to Unity, you can see that we've got OnExit here, and we can select what animation it will go to after we reload. So the animation we want to go to is actually none. We just want to set it to the default animation again. Do we want to lock the layer? Well, no. Do we want to crossfade? Yeah, sure, I'll set it to 0.2. Actually, to make my life easier, I'm going to go back to our OnExit and set the crossfade to 0.2. Right, now let's click play and let's try reloading. It'll reload, and once it's done, we'll go back to idle. And I can start moving around and I can reload and that'll work. Now another thing you'll notice is if I start spamming R, it only does one reload animation at a time. Like it doesn't override it, and that's because I've locked the animation so that nothing else can get through, even another reload animation. Now there's one more thing I need to add. Now this is a little bit more complex, but we need to add it for everything to work. So here's the scenario. What if I were to start reloading and then die? Well, you will notice that I go back to the idle animation, but when we die, I don't want it to go to any animation. So what's actually happening here is I'm reloading, and then I am overriding that reload with the death animation, but then if we were to go back to our OnExit script, well, the coroutine is still going to have effect because it's going to transition to this next animation. So if I were to do it again, if I were to start reloading and then die, we'll do the death animation and we'll go back to idle. So how do we stop this? Well, I'm going to add another variable in here and name it cancel. Alright, so what does this do? At the very start of the animation, when it enters the state, so when the reload starts, it will set cancel to be false. And then when it goes through all of this, it will check if cancel is still false. If it's still false, then it will play through this. However, if cancel has been set to true somewhere, then it will yield break and then it will stop all this from happening. So all we need to do is if the death animation is played, we need to set this cancel to be true so that this does not play. So in our animated brain, here's what I'm going to do, is under this section here, if we are bypassing the lock, so like, you know, if the animation is critical, such as a death animation or a hit animation, then I'm going to set cancel for every single on exit behavior to true. So I do not want it to carry out. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. If we are bypassing the lock, like if the animation is really critical, like a death animation, then we're going to loop through each behavior that is on exit. And then if the layer of the behavior is the same as the layer, we're going to set the cancel to equal true. But first of all, we need to do this. So there we go, I've got the layer index over here. So whenever the state is entered, I will set the layer index to what the layer index is. So let's head back to Unity and let's click play. Okay, if I were to start reloading and die, I should just die. I shouldn't play any other animations. And there we go. Now, even though I was in the middle of reloading, it did the death animation and it cancelled the rest of the reload animation. So that worked fine. Alright, so now let's get on to shooting. Let's do the shoot animation. So let's go down to our check shooting method, which is in the update method and is called right here. And that's also where we play the reload animation. So here, let's change what our conditions are for shooting. So at the moment, it's just whenever we hold the left mouse button down. But first of all, I want to check if the current animation is not the reload animation, because we can't shoot while we're reloading. Alright, there we are. So I've used the getCurrentAnimation method, which we put in our AnimatorBrain class over here, and that is this method here. So now we're finally getting to use it. But that's not all. We want to play the animation if the ball shooting is equal to true. So here in our top animation, we're going to make some changes, because when we shoot, we don't even need to care about what the bottom half is doing, because our shooting is in our hands. Alright, there we go. So if we're shooting, we play the shoot animation, and we don't even need to bother about the rest of them. And of course, the last change is that if we die, then of course I'm not going to be shooting anymore. So I'm going to get shooting and set it to false. And I'm also going to change this a little bit. I'm going to get the check death method and I'm going to move it underneath the check shooting method. So here I can shoot, and if I reload, then it will stop shooting and it will reload, and it will keep on doing that. If I start shooting and then die, then you can see I stop shooting and I just fall over. Alright, let's add the very last thing, and that is jumping. So first of all, let's go to our check jumping method, which is of course in the update method. And if we start jumping, well, I want to start playing the jump start animation. And what I'm going to do here is it plays jump start on the lower body, and also it locks the layer, so it has to go through the entire jump start animation, and it cancels everything out. Now let's go back to Unity, because let's go to our lower body, and we've got jump start, jump air, and jump end. So here we go. So in the jump start, when that finishes all the way through, I want to make the on exit, and I want it to transition to jump air. And I want to lock that layer, and let's add a crossfade of like 0.1, a little bit less. Now in jump air, I want it to keep playing this animation until it hits the ground. So I'm going to add another method in here. That's going to be called check grounded. So here's what this is going to do, is if it's grounded, then it's going to play a certain animation. So let's run through this here. So I'm going to run the animation if it's grounded or in the air, and that's what this one is giving you. And here, should we unlock the layer beforehand? And here, what animation do we want to play if it's grounded or in the air? And here, do we want to lock the layer of this next animation? And then here's the crossfade. So here in the update, we're going to check if grounded is in fact equal to grounded. And then we're going to either lock it or unlock it. And then we're going to play it. So here we've got a squiggly line here, because how do we know what is grounded? How do we know that our player is grounded? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get to our player movement, and here I've got a variable called grounded in our player movement. I'm going to remove it and put it into our AnimatorBrain instead. Alright, so here I've added a protected grounded and a public grounded. And this public grounded can only get grounded, it cannot change it. So let's go back here, and now it accepts this. So let's head back. So first of all, we start the jump, and now we're in the air, and let's add some things here. So when we are grounded, we want to unlock the layer, and then we want to play the jump end animation, and then we want to lock the layer again, and then do the crossfade, and I'm going to make this 0.1 again. Now when we end the jump, I'm going to go on exit, and then the animation I want to transition to is none. I want to reset it, and I don't want to lock the layer, and then I want to add maybe 0.1 of crossfade. And there we go, you can see it does the jump animation all the way through. And I can start running, and then we'll only do the jump animation on the bottom half. And if I start reloading and jump, you can see it does the reload animation even though I'm in the air. And there we go, so we've got all our animations all sorted, and of course I can make my character die at any moment. And there we go.